What if your greatest spiritual insight was actually your most dangerous delusion? Most people think that growth means rising above others, becoming more enlightened, more powerful, more awake. But Carl Jung knew better. He warned that the closer you get to truth, the louder your ego starts to whisper. You are special. You are chosen. You are above. That whisper doesn't elevate you. It corrupts you. And if you don't see it coming, it doesn't just sabotage your journey. It turns you into the very thing you thought you transcended. We live in a world obsessed with being seen, praised, followed. But real growth, it's invisible. It's quiet. And, ironically, the moment you think you've made it is the exact moment you start falling. Arrogance isn't just a character flaw, it's spiritual rot. It warps your perception, twists your good intentions, and seduces you into a false identity. And here's the twist. The most dangerous people aren't the obviously evil ones. They're the ones who think they're doing good, while their ego puppeteers the show from behind the curtain. In this video, we're going to uncover how the path to individuation, when hijacked by pride, leads not to freedom, but to self-deception, projection, and spiritual megalomania. We'll explore the unconscious forces that drive inflation, the archetypes that lure you in, and the shadow you must face if you truly want to evolve. Because the deeper truth is this: if you don't humble yourself, life will do it for you. Chapter 1. Ego Inflation and Integration of the Unconscious. There's a strange phenomenon that often happens to those who begin to explore their inner world. Their ego starts puffing up like a balloon at a birthday party. It's what Carl Jung called ego inflation. And here's the twist. It usually hits just when someone thinks they're finally getting it. The more unconscious material someone integrates, the more they might feel like they're becoming the self itself. But that's the trap. The ego, dazzled by the treasures it finds in the unconscious, can start thinking it owns them. It begins to speak for the soul, pretending to be the king when it's really just a servant. Picture someone who just had a major spiritual awakening. Suddenly, they're quoting sacred texts, diagnosing everyone's shadow, and offering unsolicited wisdom like they're the reincarnation of Jung himself. That's inflation in full swing. They confuse a glimpse of truth with the whole truth. And while they might think they've reached enlightenment, what's actually happening is the ego clinging to new territory, trying to avoid death by dressing up as the divine. It's not evil in itself. It's just scared of dissolving. And so it mimics the self, whispering, "I am that." You'll see this in the self-help world all the time. A guy reads 3 books, hits a meditation streak, and suddenly he's a guru. This isn't spiritual growth, it's spiritual cosplay. When the unconscious floods into consciousness, it's not meant to crown us kings. It's meant to humble us. True individuation isn't loud. It's quiet. It's grounded. It's knowing that you're a speck of dust and a spark of God, and holding both truths without inflating either. If you're starting to feel special, that's your cue to pause and recenter. The real work begins when the ego learns to relate to the unconscious, not possess it. You're not supposed to become the self. You're meant to serve it. Meditation helps. So does journaling, dream work, shadow dialogues, even therapy. But more than that, humility is your compass. Catch yourself when you start talking too much about your growth. Notice the urge to teach before you've fully digested what you've learned. That pause might save you from a messiah complex later. And don't think only the positive versions of inflation are the problem. There's a darker flavor too. When someone becomes overly identified with their pain, their trauma, their brokenness, they're still inflated, just in reverse. The ego loves playing the victim as much as it loves playing the savior. That's why integration is such a delicate dance. It asks you to touch the divine without mistaking yourself for it. Because if you do, well, let's just say the next step on this path gets even trickier. Chapter 2. the process of individuation. Individuation isn't a weekend retreat or a checklist you tick off after 10 therapy sessions. It's a lifetime process, one that drags you through mud and mystery in equal measure. Carl Jung described it as the integration of unconscious content into the conscious ego, a movement toward wholeness. But here's the catch. Wholeness doesn't mean perfection. It means honesty. It means facing the parts of yourself you've disowned, denied, or projected onto others. And that's where things get real. Because the unconscious doesn't just hand you love and light. It throws you your shadow first. Imagine walking into a room filled with mirrors, but each one distorts your image in a different way. That's what confronting the shadow feels like. You see anger where you thought you were peaceful. You discover pride underneath your humility. And you find that the people who annoy you the most often carry traits you haven't yet accepted in yourself. This is projection in action, and it's painful. But once you catch it, once you stop blaming the outside world and start owning your inner world, you reclaim a massive piece of your power. Now here's the juicy part. As you integrate the shadow, you start encountering the deeper archetypes, your inner anima or animus. These are powerful forces, the feminine or masculine energies within, shaping your emotional world and influencing how you relate to others. A man dominated by an unconscious anima might idealize women or fear them. A woman unconscious of her animus might find herself locked in inner battles of control and criticism. But when these archetypes are integrated, relationships deepen, creativity flourishes, and inner balance becomes possible. You don't have to be a Jungian analyst to start this journey. You just need curiosity and courage. Keep a dream journal. Dreams are the royal road to the unconscious. Practice active imagination. Reflect on the figures that show up in your psyche. What do they want to say? Read Jung's Memories, Dreams, Reflections, or James Hollis's The Eden Project. These aren't just books. They're maps. And you'll need maps for this terrain, because individuation doesn't come with street signs. It whispers, it nudges, it tests your willingness to see clearly. The beauty and the danger of individuation is that the more you integrate, the more responsible you become. You can no longer play the fool or the victim. You see your role in the drama. And while that can feel like a loss of innocence, it's actually the birth of integrity. But be warned, as you draw closer to the self, the ego might start whispering again. Look at you, it says. You've arrived. But the moment you believe that, well, something far more seductive begins to emerge on the horizon. Chapter 3. The Messiah Complex and Megalomania. There's a fine line between awakening and delusion, and the Messiah Complex walks it like a tightrope. When someone begins to access deep spiritual insight or feels the call of destiny, the ego can seize the opportunity to crown itself king. Suddenly, the person isn't just evolving. They believe they've been chosen, and not in the humble, sacred way. No, this is the inflated version, the one where they become the hero, the savior, the one with the answers. Carl Jung saw this as a dangerous side effect of getting too close to the self without enough psychological preparation. You've seen it before. The life coach who believes they're the reincarnation of a prophet. The spiritual influencer who no longer listens to anyone but downloads from the universe. Or the activist who starts out helping others but ends up enslaving them to their vision of truth. These are not villains. They're people overtaken by inflation. The Messiah Complex often begins with good intentions, but it warps into megalomania when the ego fuses with a divine image. Suddenly, there's no room for self-awareness, humility, or feedback. Just I know, I must, and I alone. Jung warned that the closer one gets to the self, the greater the risk of identification with it. And when that happens, the ego doesn't just inflate, it deifies itself. That's when mental health starts to unravel. You'll see symptoms of narcissism, delusions of grandeur, a sense of being persecuted by those who don't understand your mission. This martyr mindset is seductive because it offers meaning, but it's a borrowed meaning, one built on projection rather than true individuation. And without integration, it becomes a psychological time bomb. What can you do if you sense this pattern rising in yourself or someone close to you? First, ask honest questions. Do I think I'm above others? Do I dismiss criticism as ignorance? Do I secretly feel irreplaceable? Second, surround yourself with people who aren't impressed by your light, people who see your flaws and call you out. Third, read biographies of those who've fallen into spiritual inflation, like David Koresh or Jim Jones. Not to judge, but to understand how slippery the slope can be. Spirituality without shadow work is a trap. It turns enlightenment into a performance. And here's the kicker. The more spiritually advanced someone becomes, the more vulnerable they are to this complex. Why? Because the ego is clever. It adapts. It learns to wear holy robes and speak in sacred tongues. But underneath, it's still seeking control, still terrified of its own dissolution. And as this shadow grows, something even more mysterious begins to stir. Patterns, symbols, and forces that seem to move through life with eerie precision. Chapter 4. Archetypes and Synchronicity. Ever felt like the universe was winking at you? Like a song played at just the right moment, or a stranger said something that echoed your deepest thoughts? That's not coincidence, it's synchronicity. Carl Jung defined it as meaningful coincidence, a phenomenon that links the psyche and the outer world through shared symbols. And these symbols? They come from archetypes, universal patterns rooted in the collective unconscious. We're not just imagining connections. We're living inside a symbolic web that reflects our inner landscape with uncanny precision. Let's say you're wrestling with a major decision, and out of nowhere you see an image of crossroads. Then someone mentions the Matrix, and suddenly Morpheus is offering you the red pill. These aren't just random. They're signs from the unconscious, guiding you. Archetypes like the hero, the mother, the trickster, and the sage show up in dreams, books, films, and even in casual conversations. And if you pay attention, they'll reveal what stage of your journey you're in. But don't get cocky. Archetypal forces are ancient and impersonal. They don't bend the ego. They bend the ego. These patterns can be both empowering and humbling. When you identify with an archetype too strongly, you risk being possessed by it. The hero might make you courageous or reckless. The sage might make you wise or arrogant. Synchronicities often come as nudges, not mandates. They require interpretation, not obedience. Think of them like breadcrumbs, not road signs. And like any symbol, their meaning depends on your current psychological state. That's why self-awareness is key. Without it, you might misread a whisper from the self as a command from God. Want to explore this more deeply? Start tracking your synchronicities. Keep a small journal. Write down repeated symbols, animals, phrases, or numbers you encounter. Then reflect on which archetype might be active in your life right now. Are you stepping into a hero's path? Or are you dancing with a trickster? Read Man and His Symbols, or watch myth-based films like The Lion King, Star Wars, or The Matrix. These aren't just stories, they're mirrors. They help decode the psychic forces moving through your life, especially when logic alone can't explain what's happening. And here's the wildest part. As you begin to tune in to these archetypal currents, you start to sense that life itself might be alive, speaking, guiding, responding. Not in a Hollywood magic way, but in a deeply personal, quietly mystical way. And when that door cracks open, you're not just dealing with psychological symbols anymore. You're touching something far older, far deeper, and also far more dangerous when misunderstood. Chapter 5. Good versus Evil. Most people think of good and evil as external forces, heroes versus villains, light versus darkness. But Carl Jung flipped that script. He said the real battle is within. The shadow isn't some devil with horns. It's the part of you you've refused to see. And here's the kicker. Unless you face your inner evil, you'll project it onto others. Suddenly, your boss becomes the tyrant, your ex becomes the narcissist, and the world becomes a battlefield. But it's not the world you're fighting. It's yourself, wearing 1,000 masks. Think about it. Ever judge someone harshly only to realize later they mirrored something you were hiding? That's the unconscious at work. And when left unexamined, this split creates polarization. Us versus them, right versus wrong, light versus dark. It's the root of ideological extremism and spiritual bypassing. The truth is, no one is all good or all evil. The self contains both. Spirituality that only talks about love and light without confronting darkness is just a shiny form of denial. And denial is fertile ground for evil to grow in silence. But don't worry, you're not being called to become perfect. You're being called to become whole. And that means owning your potential for cruelty, manipulation, pride, even hate. It's not about acting on those impulses. It's about acknowledging them so they don't rule you from the shadows. When you repress evil, it doesn't disappear. It festers. Jung called it the return of the repressed, and it usually shows up when you're stressed, tired, or trying too hard to be the good one. That's when a mask slips and the shadow takes over. So how do you deal with this practically? Start with honest self-reflection. Ask yourself, when was the last time I blamed someone else for what I couldn't accept in me? Or what qualities in others trigger me the most? Those are clues to your shadow. Read Owning Your Own Shadow by Robert Johnson. Journal your reactions when you feel better than or worse than someone. Explore your fantasies. They're often symbolic expressions of suppressed parts of the psyche. And most importantly, practice humility. It's the antidote to moral inflation. Once you start to balance these inner forces, something strange happens. You stop trying to be good and start being real. You see others more clearly. You forgive more easily. And paradoxically, that's when true goodness begins to emerge. Not the performative kind, but the grounded, conscious kind. But be careful. This inner honesty is rare. And once you taste it, the next step isn't comfort. It's confrontation. Because once you stop projecting your darkness outward, you'll start seeing how deeply it's shaped the world around you. Chapter 6. Projection and Psychological Health. Projection is the mind's sneaky way of unloading its baggage onto someone else. Carl Jung described it as the unconscious act of attributing our own disowned traits, desires, fears, judgments to others. It's like walking around with a movie projector strapped to your forehead, casting your inner world onto everyone you meet. That person you can't stand, that one who always triggers you, chances are they're holding a mirror to something you're not ready to face in yourself. And until you own it, you'll stay trapped in that feedback loop. Let's make this real. You meet someone who seems arrogant, and you instantly dislike them. But if you dig a little deeper, you might realize you've repressed your own need for confidence or self-expression. Or maybe you resent someone's ambition because you've silenced your own dreams. This isn't about blaming yourself. It's about finding yourself in the mess. When projections remain unconscious, they fuel everything from prejudice to romantic obsession. But once you recognize them, they become invitations to deeper self-awareness and better mental health. Unchecked projection inflates the ego and distorts reality. You stop seeing people as they are and start seeing them as characters in your inner drama. That's when relationships suffer. You fall in love with a fantasy, then hate the person when they don't live up to it. You demonize authority figures, not because they're all toxic, but because they represent a part of your father complex. Projection keeps you in the victim loop, always reacting, never reflecting. And in the long run, it drains your vitality and poisons your spiritual growth. So how do you break the cycle? First, become curious about your emotional triggers. Ask yourself, why does this person annoy me so much? Or what quality in them feels familiar, even if I don't like it? Therapy helps. So does journaling, shadow work, and honest conversations with friends who aren't afraid to challenge your narrative. Books like The Shadow Effect or Romancing the Shadow can be great guides. The goal isn't to stop reacting. It's to use your reactions as clues. Because every judgment you make might just be a breadcrumb back to yourself. And here's where it gets interesting. As you dissolve your projections, the world starts to look different. People become less threatening, less magical, and more human. That's not a loss. That's clarity. And with clarity comes the power to relate rather than react. But beware, just as you think you've cleaned the lens, a new trigger appears, pulling you into the next round. And this time, it might come wrapped in the guise of a challenge, a calling, or even a quest. Chapter 7. The Hero's Journey and Psychological Development. Every great story hides a map of the human psyche. The hero's journey, popularized by Joseph Campbell and echoed by Carl Jung, is more than myth. It's a living process of psychological transformation. At the core, it begins with a call. Something feels off. Life becomes too small. That's when the unconscious starts knocking. The ego resists at first, clinging to comfort, but eventually, the pull becomes irresistible. And once the journey begins, you can't unsee what you've seen. You're no longer who you were, but not yet who you're becoming. The first major confrontation is always with the shadow. You meet monsters, external and internal. They test you. They expose your wounds. And often, they were the faces of your past. A cruel teacher, a toxic partner, a distant parent. But these figures aren't just villains, they're mirrors. The real quest isn't to defeat them, but to understand them, to integrate what they represent. Only then do you unlock the next stage of the journey, self-awareness. And let's be real, few things are scarier than truly seeing yourself without filters. As you progress, you start encountering mentors, signs, and synchronicities. These are the archetypal guides, the wise old man, the sage, the magical helper. They don't walk the path for you, but they shine light on it. Maybe it's a book that shakes your worldview, a conversation that cracks open your soul, or a breakdown that forces a breakthrough. These moments are the gifts hidden inside the trials. And if you accept them, your ego begins to shift from rigid identity to humble instrument. That's when growth gets real. Want to live your own hero's journey? Start by accepting your current dissatisfaction as a signal, not a failure. Begin therapy, start journaling, take solitude seriously. Dive into the hero with 1,000 faces or Jung's archetypes and the collective unconscious. Go on a solo trip. End a toxic cycle. Say yes to something that scares you. The journey doesn't need a plane ticket. It needs intention. And once you accept the call, life itself becomes your training ground, filled with symbolic dragons and unexpected allies. But beware, the ego has one final trick. It wants to turn the journey into an identity. I'm a seeker, it says. I'm evolving faster than the rest. That's when the hero turns into a false prophet, mistaking movement for mastery. And just when you think you've made it, you stumble upon something even deeper. A new terrain, quieter than victory, richer than power. A place where humility isn't just a virtue, it's a requirement. Chapter 8. Spiritual Growth and Humility. True spiritual growth isn't about floating above the crowd. It's about sinking into your own humanity with grace. And that requires humility, the unsung hero of every real transformation. Carl Jung warned that the deeper we go into the unconscious, the more we must bow to something greater than the ego. Because as the ego expands, so does the temptation to think we've arrived. But the self has no finish line. It humbles us again and again. Every insight we gain is just another step toward realizing how much we don't know. Humility isn't weakness, it's clarity. It's knowing you're powerful, but not all powerful. That your intuition is sharp, but still fallible. That your inner work matters deeply, but doesn't make you superior. The moment you begin comparing your growth to someone else's, you've slipped. That's the pride trap. And pride, when spiritualized, becomes especially dangerous. It dresses up as discernment, superiority, or higher vibration. But behind the scenes, it's just the ego, terrified of being small again. Real growth means dropping the act and standing naked in your truth. Let's be honest. No one wakes up wanting to be humble. We want to be seen, understood, admired. But the real test comes when we're not. When we're misunderstood, criticized, or ignored. That's where humility is forged. In silence, in restraint, in the willingness to not always be right. Practices like meditation, silence retreats, volunteering anonymously, or reading texts like the Way of the Bodhisattva all nurture this space. Not because they give you answers, but because they strip away the noise. And in that quiet, the ego loosens its grip. Humility also invites collaboration with others instead of competition. When you're humble, you don't need to be the smartest one in the room. You want to learn from the room. You welcome feedback. You embrace correction. You see teachers and people you once dismissed. And in doing so, your spiritual path opens up in unexpected ways. Wisdom finds you because you've stopped pretending to already have it. Ironically, the less you need to be special, the more special your life becomes. Not in status, but in presence. But let's be real. Humility isn't a destination. It's a daily decision. Every time you catch yourself judging, comparing, preaching, or showing off your awareness, that's your cue. And if you ignore it, well, the psyche has its ways. It might send a humbling experience, a symbolic fall, a sharp reminder that you're not above the process. And just as you kneel, face to face with your own limitations, you'll notice something strange. A new doorway begins to open. Not upward, but inward, towards something ancient, silent, and immovable. Conclusion. Where have you confused spiritual growth with superiority? Now that you've seen how arrogance can disguise itself as awakening, the real question is, what are you going to do about it? Will you keep chasing titles, identities, and external validation? Or will you have the courage to strip it all away and face what's real beneath the mask? Jung didn't promise comfort. He promised wholeness. And wholeness demands that you confront not just your light, but your darkness too. That you stop pretending you've arrived and start walking with humility, one step at a time. So let me ask you, where have you confused spiritual growth with superiority? Where have you used insight as a shield to avoid vulnerability? This isn't about guilt, it's about clarity. Because once you see the game, you can stop playing it. And when you do, something extraordinary happens. Your growth stops being about ego and starts being about truth. You stop performing and start transforming. And that shift, that's when the real journey begins. If this spoke to something inside you, then you're ready to go deeper. But don't do it alone. Drop a comment below. Tell me where pride has shown up in your journey. Let's open this space for real dialogue, not just performance. And if you want to keep exploring the depths of Carl Jung, spirituality, and true psychological freedom, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. This is just the beginning, and the next part of the path will challenge everything you think you know.